Hello, Debate High. Today, we will be covering one of the most important philosophical principles in LD debate. Social contracts have almost become synonymous with government and debate itself. Social contracts are extremely relevant to the United States and, to some extent, modern democracies. One could even argue that democracy is influenced by John Locke's interpretation of the social contract. So, all this talk about social contract and yada 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 is great and everything, but what exactly am I talking about? To start off, social contract is not the contract you might be thinking of, where you have to talk to your attorney and he advises you on the best course of action. No, social contracts involves everyone in a society. It's the single foundation and the most important societal agreement in which all members of a given civilization must obey. According to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, social contract theory, nearly as old as philosophy itself, is the view that persons' moral and/or political obligations are dependent upon a contract or agreement among them to form society in which they live. However, social contract theory is rightly associated with modern moral and political theory, and is often given its first full exposition and defense by Thomas Hobbes. After Hobbes, John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau are the best known proponents of this enormously influential theory, which has been one of the most dominant theories within moral and political theory throughout history of the modern West. What this essentially means is that in order for society to form a government, all people who wish to partake in it must give up some rights or liberties in exchange for stability, peace, and prosperity. Generally speaking, there are four popular interpretations of social contract. These include the views of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and John Rawls. I will make a video covering their views and more or less their political stances in the future, so keep an eye on that. I will include all references and original documents in the source document. I highly encourage you to read them. I give full credit to their respective authors, and remember, independent research is a cornerstone of debate. To briefly sum up their views, here is some information regarding the authors and their interpretations of the social contract. Let's start off with Thomas Hobbes. So he presents his social contract theory in The Leviathan. He claims that the state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short, and because of the state of nature is terrible, individuals form a society. They give up their rights in order to regulate social interaction. In the state of nature, individuals are sovereign, and the social contract makes the state sovereign. This contract essentially gives the state total control. You can think of this as Thomas Hobbes defending the monarchy, or an argument for the monarchy. Since the state would have absolute, total sovereign control, the people give up their rights in order to establish the state, so the state guarantees them stability, peace, and I guess you could say spare them from the evils of the state of nature, because other than that, that's really why government forms, according to Hobbes, to spare you, the individual, from the horrors of the state of nature. Moving on, we can now see John Locke. And when people say that America and Western democracies, but more specifically the United States, is a Lockean society, it's because they believe, and rightly so argue, that the Declaration of Independence and I guess you could say American democracy is heavily influenced by John Locke's view of the social contract. So he presents his views of the social contract in the Second Treatise of Government. He believes that the state of nature is not nearly as terrible as Hobbes believes it to be. Locke believes that individuals form societies in order to provide protection and security for themselves, and that social contract amounts to conceding natural rights in exchange for life, liberty, and property. So we see much of Locke's language repeated in various historical texts. Take, for example, the American Declaration of Independence. One can very well argue that it takes heavy inspiration from John Locke's interpretation of the social contract. We can see the presence of Enlightenment ideals, and in this case, I'm referring to the right of revolution and natural rights in the document. Take this excerpt from the Declaration of Independence, for example. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. This excerpt we see a direct reference to the right of revolution and calls on government to protect and guarantee life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a slightly modified version of Locke's own interpretation of life, liberty, and property. So you really well could argue that the Declaration of Independence is a fundamental Enlightenment document that takes heavy inspiration from John Locke's second treatise on government. Now that we briefly covered Locke, let's take a look at Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In The Social Contract, Rousseau sets out to answer what he takes to be the fundamental question of politics, the reconciliation of the freedom of the individual with the authority of the state. This reconciliation is necessary because human society has evolved to a point where individuals can no longer supply their needs through their own unaided efforts, but rather must depend on the cooperation of others. Rousseau claims that each person will enjoy the protection of the common force, whilst remaining as free as they were in the state of nature. This key to this reconciliation is the idea of the general will. That is, the collective will of the citizen body taken as a whole. The general will is a source of law and is willed by each and every citizen. In obeying the law, each citizen is thus subject to his or her own will, and consequently, according to Rousseau, remains free. So what I just read to you comes directly from I believe the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And to briefly sum up what Rousseau is arguing about is that you give up some of your freedoms and some of your natural rights in order to have a stake in the general will. And your stake in the general will allow you to have a say on what laws and ordinances and how society will be shaped. Not only do you remain free as if you were in a state of nature, but you become part of building the society in which you live in. And thus, your will is now part of the collective will in what Rousseau calls the general will. And Rousseau's philosophy is actually really fascinating, and I highly encourage you do some independent research and further read upon all of the authors I will mention here today. But take a look at Rousseau, definitely take a look at Hobbes, and of course, if you are taking any government class that relates to American government, please take a look at John Locke, because you will see much of his ideals present and echoing through much of America's historical documents. And that really is no coincidence, given that they share much, I guess you could say, intellectual values. Let's now take a look at John Rawls. So John Rawls is pretty much different from all of his peers in the sense that, one, he's American, so he's a New World philosopher, and two, he's a lot more current and more recent. His most influential work, and where he outlines his view of the social contract, a theory of justice, was published in 1971. So as you can very well see, it's centuries after the Second Treatise on Government, Leviathan, and the Social Contract. So John Rawls had pretty much centuries of time in advance to kind of conglomerate his views and present it in a theory of justice. Now let's take a look at an excerpt from the Theory of Justice where John Rawls sets out to present his view of the social contract. So in it, he says, "My aim is to present a conception of justice, which generalizes and carries to a higher level of abstraction the familiar theory of the social contract as found, say, in Locke, Rousseau, and Kant. In order to do so, we are not to think of the original contract as one to enter in a particular society or to set up a particular form of government. Rather, a guiding idea that is the principle of justice for the basic structure of society are the objects of the original agreement. They are the principles that free and rational persons concerned to further their own interest would accept in an initial position of equality as defining the fundamental terms of their association. These principles are to regulate all further agreement. They specify the kinds of social cooperation that can be entered into and forms of government that can be established. This way of regarding the principles of justice, I shall call justice as fairness. Thus, we are to imagine that those who engage in social cooperation choose together, in one joint act, the principles which are to assign basic rights and duties and to determine the division of social benefits. It's a mouthful, I admit, but what Rawls is effectively saying is that his interpretation of a social contract is in one where free, rational, self-interested agents strive to cooperate in order to make a government which has in an ultimate goal to provide justice to all, and justice in the form of fairness, where social benefits and social obligations are, I guess, redistributed fairly among its citizens. And ultimately, John Locke presents a form of social contract in where justice is really emphasized. It's very interesting in the way he decides to point out his views. If there's any author that merits a further reading and more research upon, it's definitely John Rawls. I really think that his views on A Veil of Ignorance is extremely interesting, and I will definitely make a video on that in the future, so keep an eye out for that. And I genuinely believe that more people understanding social contract theory and its applications in government not only will benefit with it in the debate space, but also will benefit in terms of society and in terms of understanding how policy decisions are made and why we live in the type of form of government that we live in. It's generally a good skill to have. So let's pivot back a bit and let's reflect on what importance does social contract theory have in the debate space. Becoming familiar with the social contract can help you understand how arguments work, especially in the debate space. Think about this. Does an argument violate the social contract, or does it uphold it? Should you affirm or negate a resolution if it violates the social contract? In my view, social contract theory in debate is a matter of application. What I mean is, how does my argument interact in terms of the social contract? Does my argument support the contract, or does it call for the contract to be repealed or removed? Take, for example, a resolution that calls for a course of action that guarantees a just outcome. You might want to tailor your arguments so that they fit in line with the views of Rawls. You might even go on a different route and say that contractarianism is in fact harmful. In order to make those arguments, you must first understand the contract itself. Social contracts allow us to understand more about government and the philosophy behind it. Think about this, and make sure to analyze, does your argument fit in line with social contract theory? Does it support it, or does it call to repeal it? If you are able to understand the applicability of your argument, then you can learn to analyze whether that argument is strong or weak. Encyclopedia Britannica presents a wonderful set of questions that can be answered with a social contract. Take for a look, what, if anything, justifies the authority of the state? What are the proper limits of state power? Under what circumstances, if any, is it morally right to overthrow a state? If you pay close attention, these sorts of questions are frequently asked in debate rounds. And if you understand the philosophy behind social contract, you will be able to answer them really fast, really effectively, and you'll be able to move on to your next talking point. In conclusion, today we learned about what social contract is, who the principal proponents and what their views are, and how social contract theory can be a useful tool to use in a debate round. Thank you so much for watching Debate High. We really appreciate your support. Consider checking out our other videos regarding debate. Thank you again for watching Debate High and supporting our mission of student-led, student-oriented content. Make sure to check out our source doc, do further independent research, and check out the authors who were listed in today's video. Thank you so much,